What would you do if your own child stopped the car in a raging storm, looked straight ahead without meeting your eyes, and said, "You need to be taught a lesson," before gunning the engine and abandoning you alone on a dark roadside? I am Evelyn Parker, 70 years old, a widow from Michigan, and I used to believe that love and patience could heal any crack in a family. But that night, under the pouring rain, I learned something different. Silence can become the sharpest weapon of all. My son Michael didn't just abandon me more than 30 miles from home. He believed that loneliness and desperation would make me surrender. So he and his wife Ashley could easily seize the lake house my beloved husband had left behind. What he didn't know was that the dash cam in his car was silently recording every cruel word, every moment of abandonment, every piece of their calculated deception. That night, I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I just stood in the rain, clutching the old umbrella my husband had bought me years ago, making a promise to myself I would not break. The lesson my son thought he was teaching me would become his own judgment, and my sweet revenge would be justice, ringing clear in a courtroom. The rain was coming down in sheets that October evening, each drop hitting the windshield like bullets of ice. I sat in the passenger seat of Michael's Honda, my hands folded in my lap, watching the wipers struggle against the storm. We'd been driving for nearly an hour, supposedly heading back from dinner at that new Italian place downtown. But something felt wrong. The route was unfamiliar, and Michael's jaw was set in that particular way that meant trouble. "Where are we going, honey?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "This doesn't look like the way home." He didn't answer, just kept driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, cold, distant, nothing like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. Ashley, my daughter-in-law, had stayed behind at the restaurant, claiming she needed to make some important phone calls. Now I understood why. She was probably already at my house, going through my papers, my personal belongings, looking for anything she could use against me. The car slowed, then pulled over to the shoulder of a desolate stretch of highway. Rain hammered the roof like an angry fist. Michael turned off the engine but left the headlights on, illuminating the empty road ahead. The silence inside the car was deafening. "Michael," I said carefully, "what's going on? Why did we stop?" He finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in his face made my blood run cold. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger wearing his features, someone who had calculated this moment down to the minute. "You need to be taught a lesson," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You can't keep fighting us on this, Mom. The house, the accounts, everything. It's going to happen whether you cooperate or not. Ashley and I have been patient, but your stubbornness is putting the whole family at risk." I stared at him, rain blurring my vision through the passenger window. "What are you talking about?" "What lesson?" "Get out," he said simply. "Michael, it's pouring rain. We're miles from—" "Get out of my car!" The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at this man who had once been my baby, my only child, the little boy I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights, and saw nothing but cold calculation. "You're scaring me," I whispered. "Good," he replied. "Maybe fear will make you more reasonable than love ever did." That's when I knew. This wasn't a moment of anger or frustration. This was planned, premeditated. Ashley's important phone calls at the restaurant, the long drive to nowhere, the timing with the storm. They had orchestrated this down to the last detail. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. The rain was so heavy I could barely see 5 feet beyond the headlights. No houses, no lights, no sign of civilization anywhere. Please, Michael, I said one last time, don't do this. I'm your mother. He looked straight ahead, hands still gripping the steering wheel. And you need to start acting like it. Stop being selfish. Think about what's best for the family for once. I opened the door and stepped out into the storm. The wind immediately caught my thin coat, whipping it around my legs. Rain soaked through to my skin in seconds. I turned back to the car, hoping to see some flicker of regret in his eyes, some sign that my son was still in there somewhere. Instead, he rolled down the window just enough to speak. There's a gas station about 3 miles back. You can call someone from there. Think about what I said, Mom. This doesn't have to be difficult. The window rolled up, the engine started, and my son drove away, leaving me standing alone on the shoulder of a dark highway in the worst storm Michigan had seen all year. But he made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, in his certainty that this would break me, Michael forgot about the dash cam. The little device he'd installed for safety purposes was still running, still recording. Every word, every cruel calculation, every moment of this abandonment. It was all there, stored on a memory card that would soon become the most important evidence in my life. I stood there in the rain for maybe 2 minutes, letting the reality sink in. My own son had just tried to terrorize me into submission. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about power, about knowing my place, about accepting that I was nothing more than an obstacle to his plans. Instead, he had just given me something far more valuable than he could have imagined: absolute clarity about who he really was, and documented proof of what he was willing to do to get what he wanted. I reached into my purse and pulled out my cell phone, grateful that the rain hadn't destroyed it yet. But I didn't call 911. I didn't call a taxi. I called my brother Robert, who had been waiting for this exact moment. "It's me," I said when he answered. He did it, just like we thought he would. "I'm at the mobile station on Route 23, Robert said, "about 2 miles south of where you are. I can see you on the GPS tracking from that phone app we set up. Stay exactly where you are, Evelyn. I'm coming." You see, this wasn't the first time Michael and Ashley had tried to intimidate me. For months, they'd been escalating their tactics, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before I would break. But what they didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this night. I'd been documenting everything, planning for the moment when they would finally reveal their true intentions. My brother's headlights cut through the rain 15 minutes later. He pulled over and jumped out, not caring that he was getting soaked. He wrapped a warm blanket around my shoulders and helped me into his truck. "Did you get what you needed?" he asked as we drove toward town. I held up my phone, showing him the video I'd just finished uploading to a secure cloud account. The dashcam footage was already safely backed up in 3 different locations, along with months of documented evidence I'd been collecting. "Everything," I said. "Every word, every cruel moment. It's all there." Robert squeezed my hand. "Good. Because tomorrow, we're going to make sure the whole world sees exactly what kind of man your son really is." As we drove through the storm toward town, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of a mother trying to save her relationship with her son, but the steady, determined hope of a woman who finally understood that some people don't deserve your love, no matter how much DNA you share. Michael thought he was teaching me a lesson about powerlessness. Instead, he had just given me the tools to teach him a lesson about consequences. And unlike his cruel education in the rain, mine would be delivered in a courtroom with the full weight of the law behind it. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The next morning dawned gray and cold, matching my mood, as I sat in Robert's kitchen, still wearing the clothes from the night before. Every muscle in my body ached from standing in that freezing rain, but my mind was crystal clear. I had work to do. "How long have you been planning for this?" Robert asked, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. "6 months," I admitted, "ever since I first noticed the money missing from our joint account. Little amounts at first: 30, 60, $90. I thought maybe I was forgetting ATM withdrawals, getting old and confused like Ashley kept suggesting. But then it escalated. I pulled out the leather-bound notebook I'd been carrying in my purse, page after page of meticulous documentation. Dates, amounts, conversations, witnesses. Every suspicious transaction, every manipulative comment, every attempt to gaslight me into thinking I was losing my mind. "Look at this," I said, flipping to a page from August. "Ashley brought a notary to my house, told me it was just paperwork to make things easier if something happened to me. Power of attorney documents, she called them, for my peace of mind." Robert examined the entry. I'd written down every word of that conversation, including Ashley's exact phrasing. "You're not getting any younger, Mom. What if you have another episode like Dad did? We just want to make sure someone can take care of things." "Episode?" Robert asked. "That's what she called Harold's stroke." "An episode. Like it was something embarrassing that happened at a dinner party, not the massive cerebral hemorrhage that took my husband of 42 years." I turned to another page, this one from September. This is when Michael started telling the neighbors I was having memory issues. Mrs. Patterson from next door mentioned it to me at the grocery store, said she was so sorry to hear about my condition, and if I needed any help managing my affairs. The pattern was clear. They'd been laying groundwork for months, creating a narrative that I was incompetent, confused, unable to manage my own life, setting the stage for the day when they could point to my declining mental state as justification for taking control of everything Harold and I had worked 50 years to build. "The house," Robert said. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" I nodded. Harold left it to me free and clear. 200 feet of Lake Huron shoreline, 4 bedrooms, fully renovated kitchen, worth at least $800,000, maybe more in today's market. Ashley's had her eye on it since the day Harold died. And Michael's going along with it? Michael's drowning in debt. I showed him another page of notes: credit cards, a business loan that went bad, 2 mortgages on their current house. Ashley convinced him that my stubbornness was the only thing standing between them and financial security. I'd done my homework. Financial records were public information if you knew where to look, and I'd spent decades as a bank treasurer before I retired. Michael owed more money than he'd probably told Ashley, and Ashley had expensive tastes, that far exceeded their income. The lake house wasn't just an asset to them, it was their escape route from bankruptcy. So, what's the plan? Robert asked. I smiled for the first time since the night before. Well, first, we call Eleanor Matthews. Eleanor had been Harold's attorney for 30 years, and she'd helped us draft our wills back when Michael was still someone I trusted. She was in her 70s now, semi retired, but she still handled family law cases. More importantly, she specialized in elder abuse. Elder abuse, she repeated when I called her an hour later. Evelyn, are you sure that's what we're dealing with here? He abandoned me on a highway in a thunderstorm, I said flatly, 30 miles from home, at night, with no way to get back except to surrender control of my finances and property. What would you call it? There was a long pause. Financial exploitation through coercion and intimidation, possibly criminal abandonment, depending on the circumstances. Do you have any evidence? Video evidence, I said. Complete audio and video recording of the entire incident, including his explicit threats about my property. Bring it to my office this afternoon. And Evelyn, don't tell anyone else about this recording yet, not until we've had a chance to review it properly. The drive to Eleanor's office gave me time to think about how this had all started. Harold had been gone 8 months now, and the first few weeks after his funeral, Michael and Ashley had been supportive, helpful even. They'd handled the funeral arrangements, helped me organize his papers, made sure I wasn't alone during those dark, early days of grief. But then, Ashley started making comments about the house being too big for just one person. Michael began asking detailed questions about Harold's investments, our savings accounts, the exact terms of his will. They offered to help manage my finances, suggested combining our accounts for simplicity. When I hesitated, the pressure increased. Ashley started bringing real estate brochures for lovely senior communities where I could make new friends my own age. Michael talked about property taxes and maintenance costs, about how overwhelming it must be to manage such a large house alone. They weren't helping me process grief. They were trying to convince me that independence was impossible, that I needed them, that the smart thing, the only reasonable thing, would be to let them take control. I'd refused, politely at first, then more firmly as their suggestions became demands. That's when the narrative about my memory problems began, along with the mysterious withdrawals from our joint checking account. Eleanor's office hadn't changed in 30 years. Same oak paneling, same leather chairs, same sense of quiet competence that had made Harold and I trust her with our most important decisions. She was waiting for me with a legal pad and a laptop computer. Show me what you have, she said without preamble. I connected my phone to her laptop and played the dash cam footage. Even in the familiar safety of Eleanor's office, watching it again made my chest tight with anger. Michael's voice, cold and calculating. You need to be taught a lesson. The sound of rain against the windshield. My own voice, small and frightened. Please, Michael, don't do this. I'm your mother. Eleanor watched without expression until the video ended with Michael driving away, leaving me standing alone in the storm. This is criminal abandonment, she said immediately. Possibly assault, depending on how the prosecutor wants to charge it. An adult child intentionally placing an elderly parent in danger as a means of coercion. The fact that he explicitly connected this to your property makes it financial exploitation as well. She turned to a fresh page on her legal pad. I need you to tell me everything, Evelyn. Every conversation, every incident, every attempt to pressure you into signing documents or changing your financial arrangements. Everything you've documented in that notebook. For the next 2 hours, I laid out the entire timeline: the missing money, the surprise visits with notaries, Ashley's real estate friend who'd stopped by to chat and ended up taking detailed measurements of my house, Michael's conversations with neighbors about my condition, the increasing pressure to sign power of attorney documents. Eleanor took notes steadily, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with something like admiration. "You've been planning for this confrontation for months," she said. "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "I knew they were building towards something. I just didn't know it would be this extreme." The documentation is excellent. The video evidence is compelling. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? This won't just be a civil lawsuit. I'm going to recommend criminal charges. I thought about Michael's face in the rearview mirror as he drove away. The complete absence of remorse or concern for my safety. The calculated cruelty of abandoning his own mother in a storm because she wouldn't surrender her independence. What kind of charges? Elder abuse, financial exploitation, criminal abandonment, possibly extortion, depending on how aggressively the prosecutor wants to pursue it. Your son could face jail time, Evelyn. Good, I said without hesitation. Maybe a few months in county lockup will teach him the lesson he was trying to teach me. Eleanor smiled grimly. There's something else we need to discuss. Your financial accounts. Any joint holdings with Michael or Ashley need to be frozen immediately. If they realize you're building a case against them, they might try to clean out anything they have access to. That afternoon, we drove to First National Bank, where I'd done business for 40 years. Harold and I had maintained separate accounts, in addition to our joint checking, but after his death, I'd added Michael as a co-signer on the checking account, a decision I now deeply regretted. I need to remove my son from this account and freeze any further activity, I told Janet, the branch manager. Janet knew our family, had handled our mortgage paperwork and Harold's estate documentation. She looked surprised but professional as she pulled up the account information. There's been quite a bit of activity on this account recently, she said carefully. Are you aware of the withdrawals over the past few months? I'd suspected, but seeing it laid out in black and white was still shocking. Nearly $8,000, withdrawn in amounts just small enough to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Gas station, ATM withdrawals, online transfers, cash advances, a pattern of systematic theft designed to look like normal spending. I want copies of everything, I said. Every transaction, every location, every timestamp. And I want that account closed immediately. Janet printed out 6 months of statements while Eleanor took notes. The pattern was even clearer on paper. Small withdrawals at first, then increasingly large amounts as they tested whether I was paying attention. The final withdrawal had been 3 days ago, $1,000, taken the same day Ashley had brought those power of attorney papers to my house. This is evidence of ongoing financial exploitation, Eleanor said, as we reviewed the statements. Combined with the video from last night, we have a very strong case. What about the house? I asked. Can they still try to claim I'm incompetent and force a sale? Not anymore, Eleanor said with satisfaction. As of this afternoon, I've filed a protective order on your behalf. Michael and Ashley are legally prohibited from contacting you, approaching your property, or attempting to access any of your financial accounts. If they violate that order, they'll be arrested immediately. We spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything, photographing the notebook entries, making copies of bank statements, uploading the dash cam footage to Eleanor's secure server. By evening, I had a comprehensive legal file that painted a clear picture of months of systematic abuse and manipulation. "What happens next?" I asked as we finished. "Tomorrow morning, I file formal charges with the prosecutor's office. We request a grand jury review for criminal indictment. In the meantime, you go home to your house, Evelyn, not theirs, and you live your life." They're going to be angry when they find out about the protective order. Let them be angry. They can be angry from a distance, and they can be angry without access to your money or your property. I drove home as the sun was setting over Lake Huron, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Harold had always loved. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left for that dinner the night before. But something fundamental had changed. This wasn't just the place I lived. It was my fortress, legally protected and financially secure. For the first time in months, I felt truly safe in my own home. Michael called that evening around 9 o'clock. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with Eleanor's warning in mind. Document everything. Save everything, but don't engage directly. "Mom, it's me," his recorded voice said, trying to sound concerned and reasonable. "I heard from the bank that you closed our joint account. I'm sure you're upset about last night, and maybe I came on a little strong, but we need to talk. Ashley and I are worried about you making decisions when you're emotional. Call me back." I saved the message and added it to my evidence file. Even now, even after abandoning me in a storm, he was still trying to gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. The second message came an hour later, Ashley's voice this time. "Evelyn, we need to discuss what happened yesterday. Michael feels terrible about the misunderstanding, but your behavior lately has us concerned. We can't help you if you won't let us. Please call us back so we can work this out as a family." Misunderstanding. That's what she called it. Not abandonment, not cruelty, not criminal behavior. A misunderstanding. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Harold's favorite chair, looking out at the lake. Tomorrow, this would all become public. The prosecutor would review the evidence, the local news would probably pick up the story, and Michael and Ashley would discover that their confused old lady had outmaneuvered them completely. But tonight, I was just a woman in her own home, safe and warm and legally protected, watching the stars reflect on the water her husband had loved. For the first time since Harold died, I felt like myself again. The phone rang a third time around midnight. I didn't even look at the caller ID before declining the call. Whatever they had to say, whatever threats or pleas or manipulations they were planning to try, it no longer mattered. I had found my voice, and tomorrow, the whole world would hear it. The call came at 7 in the morning, waking me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in months. "Mrs. Parker, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Michigan State Police. We need to speak with you about the charges you filed against your son." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Has something happened? We attempted to serve Michael Parker with the protective order and criminal complaint at his residence this morning. The house appears to be empty, cleaned out in a hurry. Neighbors say they saw a moving truck there around midnight. Do you know where they might have gone? My heart sank. I'd expected anger, maybe desperate phone calls or attempts to intimidate me into dropping the charges. I hadn't expected them to run. No idea, I said honestly. But detective, they have access to credit cards and possibly cash that was stolen from my accounts. If they're running, they might have significant resources. We'll put out a BOLO alert. In the meantime, we'd like you to come in to give a formal statement. Can you be at the state police post by 10 this morning? I called Eleanor immediately. They've disappeared, I told her. Michael and Ashley, they're gone. Running makes them look guilty, Eleanor said pragmatically. And it doesn't change the strength of our case. If anything, it reinforces that they knew what they were doing was criminal. The state police post was a modern building about 20 minutes from my house. Detective Chen turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of Eleanor. I've reviewed the video evidence your attorney provided, she said as we sat in an interview room. What your son did was clearly criminal. But I need you to understand. Pressing charges against family members can be complicated. Are you absolutely certain you want to pursue this? Detective, I said, pulling out my notebook and the bank statements. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a calculated campaign to steal my property and destroy my independence. Look at this evidence and tell me if you think these people deserve the protection of family loyalty. She spent an hour going through everything: the documented conversations, the financial records, the timeline of escalating pressure, and manipulation. When she finished, her expression had hardened considerably. This is one of the most systematic cases of elder abuse I've seen, she said. The video evidence alone would be enough for conviction, but combined with the financial exploitation and the documented pattern of psychological abuse, Mrs. Parker, when we find them, they're going to face serious charges. When you find them, we will find them. Running from charges this serious only makes it worse for them. Every day they stay away, they're racking up additional charges. Fleeing across state lines would make it federal. I gave my formal statement, signed the necessary paperwork, and left the police station feeling both vindicated and oddly sad. I'd wanted justice, but I'd also harbored some small hope that Michael would come to his senses, that some part of my son was still in there somewhere. His decision to run eliminated that possibility entirely. Eleanor called that afternoon with an update. The prosecutor has agreed to pursue the maximum charges: first-degree financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, criminal abandonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and theft. If convicted on all counts, Michael could face up to 15 years in prison. And Ashley? As his co-conspirator, she faces the same charges: the money they withdrew from your account, the fake documents they tried to get you to sign, the coordinated campaign to discredit your mental capacity. She was involved in all of it. 2 weeks passed with no word about Michael and Ashley's whereabouts. I fell into a routine: morning coffee on the deck overlooking the lake, afternoons working in Harold's garden, evenings reading or watching old movies. The house felt peaceful again, like it had when Harold was alive, and I didn't have to constantly defend my right to live in it. The calls had stopped, the pressure was gone. For the first time in months, I could simply exist in my own space without calculating how every word or action might be used against me. Then Detective Chen called again. "We found them," she said. "They were arrested this morning in Tampa, Florida. Apparently, they've been living in an extended stay hotel, using cash and prepaid credit cards. They're being extradited back to Michigan." "How did you track them down?" Ashley made a mistake. She used one of the stolen credit cards to pay for their hotel room. The second she swiped it, our fraud alert system flagged the location. Tampa police picked them up within hours. The arraignment was scheduled for the following Thursday. Eleanor advised me that I didn't need to attend, but I wanted to be there. I wanted to look Michael in the eye and let him see that his lesson hadn't broken me. It had made me stronger. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, a modest building that served the county's legal needs with quiet efficiency. I sat in the gallery with Robert and Eleanor, watching as Michael and Ashley were brought in, wearing orange jail jumpsuits and handcuffs. Michael looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his hair was unwashed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But it wasn't his appearance that struck me. It was the way he refused to look in my direction. Even now, even facing serious criminal charges, he couldn't acknowledge what he'd done to me. Ashley, on the other hand, stared directly at me with undisguised hatred, as if this was somehow my fault, as if I'd been unreasonable in expecting my son not to abandon me on a highway in a thunderstorm. Judge Patricia Morrison read the charges in a clear, steady voice. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult in the first degree. Criminal. Abandonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft in the second degree. The list went on for nearly 5 minutes. When asked how they pleaded, both defendants said not guilty in barely audible voices. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Amanda Rivers, addressed the court. "Your Honor, the defendants fled the jurisdiction when charges were filed, demonstrating both consciousness of guilt and flight risk. The state requests they be held without bail pending trial." Michael's public defender, a tired-looking man in a rumpled suit, argued for reasonable bail, claiming his clients had simply gone on a previously planned vacation and were unaware of the charges against them. Judge Morrison wasn't buying it. The defendants withdrew nearly $8,000 from the victim's account over several months, then fled the state when charges were filed. They are remanded to custody pending trial. No bail. As they were led away, Michael finally looked at me. Just for a moment, our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw fear there and regret, but not for what he'd done to me. He was regretting getting caught. The trial was scheduled for February, 3 months away. Eleanor warned me that plea negotiations would probably begin soon, and I should prepare for the possibility that Michael and Ashley might avoid the maximum sentences in exchange for guilty pleas. What would that mean? I asked. Probably 3 to 5 years in prison instead of the full 15. They'd have to make full restitution for the money they stole. And they'd be prohibited from contacting you for the duration of their sentences. And if they don't take a plea deal, then we go to trial, and a jury watches that dash cam video of your son abandoning you in a storm. I don't think they'll want to risk that. She was right. Michael's attorney called 2 weeks later with a plea offer. Guilty on all counts in exchange for reduced sentencing recommendations. Michael would serve 4 years in state prison. Ashley, 3 years. They would pay full restitution plus damages, and a permanent restraining order would prevent them from ever contacting me again. "It's a good deal," Eleanor said. "It gives you closure without the trauma of a public trial. And it ensures they face real consequences for what they did." I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. I want the full trial, I said. Eleanor looked surprised. Evelyn, are you sure? A trial means testifying in open court, cross examination, having every detail of your family's dysfunction aired in public. The plea deal would accomplish the same thing with less stress on you. I want people to see that dash cam video, I said firmly. I want them to hear exactly what my son said to me and watch him drive away. Some lessons need to be taught in public. The trial began on a cold February morning. The courtroom was packed, word had spread through our small community about the case, and apparently, elder abuse was a topic that resonated with a lot of people. Prosecutor Rivers laid out the timeline methodically. Months of systematic financial exploitation, psychological manipulation designed to make me question my own competence, and finally, the night of criminal abandonment that tied it all together. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said in her opening statement, this case is about the calculated abuse of a vulnerable, elderly woman by the very people who should have been protecting her. The defendants didn't just steal Mrs. Parker's money. They tried to steal her independence, her dignity, and her sense of reality itself. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a confused, elderly woman who had misunderstood her son's well-intentioned efforts to help manage her affairs. He suggested that the highway incident was a miscommunication and that Michael had simply been trying to teach me a lesson about self-reliance. Then Rivers played the dash cam video. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as Michael's voice filled the air. You need to be taught a lesson. The sound of rain against the windshield. My voice, small and frightened. Please, Michael. Don't do this. I'm your mother. The cruel finality of him driving away, leaving me standing alone in the storm. Several jury members visibly recoiled. One woman in the back row was wiping tears from her eyes. When the video ended, the silence stretched for several seconds before Judge Morrison spoke. The court will take a 15-minute recess. During the break, I saw Michael's attorney speaking urgently with his client. Ashley was crying, finally seeming to understand that their actions looked exactly as cruel and calculated as they actually were. When court reconvened, the defense attorney approached the bench. Your Honor, in light of the evidence presented, my clients would like to change their pleas to guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison looked stern. Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you are waiving your right to appeal and accepting full responsibility for these charges? Michael stood on shaking legs. Yes, Your Honor. And you, Mrs. Ashley Parker? Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Judge Morrison had clearly been affected by the video evidence. Michael received the maximum sentence, 8 years in state prison. Ashley got 5 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution, plus punitive damages totaling nearly $50,000. The court finds that these defendants engaged in systematic, calculated abuse of a vulnerable, elderly victim. Judge Morrison said at sentencing, their actions represent a profound betrayal of family trust and basic human decency. The sentence reflects both the seriousness of these crimes and the court's determination to send a clear message that elder abuse will not be tolerated in this jurisdiction. As they were led away to begin their sentences, neither Michael nor Ashley looked in my direction. They had finally learned their lesson, but it wasn't the one they'd tried to teach me in that storm. I walked out of the courthouse into bright February sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in years. Robert took my arm as we walked to his car. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," I said simply. "For the first time in months, I feel completely free." The local newspaper ran a front page story about the trial the next day. Local mother testifies against son in elder abuse case. The article included quotes from the prosecutor about the growing problem of financial exploitation of elderly adults and resources for families dealing with similar situations. My phone rang all day with calls from people I'd known for years: neighbors, former coworkers, friends from church. Everyone wanted to express support and admiration for my courage in pursuing justice. "You should be proud of yourself," said Clara, my old friend who'd first suggested installing the dash cam. "A lot of people in your situation would have just given up. Let them have what they wanted to avoid the confrontation." I almost did, I admitted. There were moments when I thought maybe it would be easier to just sign their papers and let them manage everything. But then I'd remember Harold's face when he gave me this house. How proud he was that we'd built something to leave behind. I couldn't let them destroy that. That evening, I sat on my deck watching the sunset over Lake Huron, holding a cup of coffee in Harold's favorite mug. The house was quiet around me, not the oppressive quiet of fear and isolation I'd lived with for months, but the peaceful quiet of safety and solitude. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I felt a familiar spike of anxiety. Could Michael somehow be contacting me from prison? But it was from a woman named Susan Martinez in Grand Rapids. "Mrs. Parker, I read about your case in the news. I wanted you to know that your courage inspired me to report my daughter's financial abuse. The police are investigating now. Thank you for showing me that I don't have to be a victim." Over the next few weeks, I received dozens of similar messages. Women and men who had been systematically abused by family members, who had been gaslit into thinking they were confused or incompetent, who had finally found the strength to fight back after seeing that justice was possible. I realized that Michael had been right about one thing. I had needed to be taught a lesson. But the lesson wasn't about submission or accepting my place as a victim. The lesson was about the power of documentation, the strength that comes from preparation, and the importance of standing up for yourself even when, especially when, the abuser is someone you love. 3 months after the trial, I received a letter from the state attorney general's office. They were launching a statewide initiative to combat elder abuse, and they wanted to use my case as a model for how victims could protect themselves through careful documentation and legal preparation. "Would you be willing to speak at training sessions for law enforcement and social workers?" the letter asked. "Your experience could help train professionals to recognize the signs of elder abuse and support victims in building cases against their abusers." I called Eleanor immediately. "They want me to become a public speaker," I said, "to help other people in similar situations." "What do you think about that?" she asked. I looked around my living room, at the photos of Harold and me, at the life we'd built together, at the home I'd fought so hard to protect. "I think Harold would be proud," I said. "He always said that if you learn something the hard way, you have an obligation to help others learn it the easier way." My first speaking engagement was at a training session for adult protective services workers in Detroit. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of social workers and police officers, I felt nervous, but determined. Elder abuse isn't always obvious, I began. It doesn't always involve bruises or broken bones. Sometimes it looks like concerned family members who just want to help manage your affairs. Sometimes it looks like adult children who are worried about your confusion and think you need their guidance. I told them about the gradual escalation, the way Michael and Ashley had tested boundaries and increased pressure over months. I explained the importance of documentation, of trusting your instincts even when people you love are telling you those instincts are wrong. And I showed them the dash cam video. Even in a room full of law enforcement professionals who had seen every form of human cruelty, the video had an impact. When it ended, the room was completely silent. That video saved my life, I said, not just because it provided evidence for prosecution, but because it proved to me that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't confused, and I wasn't wrong to defend myself. Sometimes, the most important witness to abuse is the abuse itself. After my presentation, a young social worker approached me with tears in her eyes. My grandmother is going through something similar right now, she said. My uncle has been pressuring her to sell her house and move into assisted living, but she's completely capable of living independently. After hearing your story, I think I need to have a serious conversation with her about getting some legal protection in place. Trust your instincts, I told her. And remember, being related to someone doesn't give them the right to control your life or steal your independence. Over the next year, I spoke at dozens of events across Michigan and surrounding states. Police departments, social service agencies, senior centers, legal aid organizations, anywhere people were working to combat elder abuse. The response was always the same: gratitude from professionals who finally understood what to look for, and relief from elderly people who realized they weren't alone in facing these situations. I kept living in my lake house, tending Harold's garden and watching the seasons change over Lake Huron. But I was no longer just a widow trying to protect what her husband had left behind. I had become something I never expected: an advocate, a teacher, and a living example that silence doesn't have to mean powerlessness. Michael and Ashley remained in prison, serving their sentences and paying restitution from their prison jobs at 25 cents an hour. Occasionally, I wondered if they ever thought about that night in the storm, if they ever regretted the choice that had destroyed their freedom and their family. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all. I had more important work to do. 5 years have passed since that terrible night when my son abandoned me in a thunderstorm, thinking he could terrorize me into surrendering my independence. As I write this, I'm sitting on the deck of the lake house Harold and I bought together 43 years ago, watching the morning sun paint Lake Huron in shades of gold and silver. The house is exactly as it should be: mine, legally and morally, protected by law and filled with the memories of a life well lived. Harold's garden is thriving. I've learned to tend his roses and even added some perennials of my own. The dash cam that saved my life is still in my car, still recording, still standing guard against anyone who might mistake my kindness for weakness. Michael was released from prison last month after serving 6 years of his 8-year sentence. I know this because the Victim Services Coordinator called to inform me, as required by law. He didn't contact me directly. The restraining order is permanent, and he's learned that violating it would send him straight back to prison. Ashley served her full 5-year sentence and moved to Arizona upon release. According to the private investigator Eleanor hired to keep track of them, she works at a call center and lives in a studio apartment. The woman who once coveted my lake house now struggles to afford basic necessities. And the irony is not lost on me. I don't feel satisfied by their struggles, exactly, but I don't feel sorry for them either. They made choices, calculated and cruel choices, and they face the consequences. That's not revenge. That's justice. The work I began after the trial has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. I now serve on the board of directors for the Michigan Elder Justice Coalition, and I've spoken at training sessions in over 30 states. The dashcam video that exposed Michael's cruelty has been used in law enforcement training programs across the country. But the most meaningful part of my advocacy work isn't the official presentations or the policy meetings. It's the individual conversations. The elderly woman in Ohio who recognized the signs of financial abuse in her nephew's behavior. The retired teacher in Florida who documented her daughter's attempts to force her into assisted living. The grandfather in Texas who discovered his son-in-law had been forging his signature on financial documents. Your story gave me permission to protect myself, they tell me. It showed me that fighting back wasn't selfish or mean. It was necessary. That's the lesson I hope people take from my experience. You are never too old to defend yourself, never too dependent to demand respect, never too trusting to question someone's motives. Family relationships don't excuse abuse, and love doesn't require you to surrender your agency to someone else's control. The dash cam still sits in my car, a small device that serves as both protection and reminder. Technology gave me the evidence I needed to prove the truth, but it was my own preparation and determination that made justice possible. I think about that night in the storm sometimes, not the terror and abandonment, but the moment when I realized I had a choice. I could accept Michael's version of the story, in which I was a confused old woman who needed to be managed and controlled. Or I could insist on the truth, that I was a competent adult who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Choosing the truth wasn't easy. It cost me my relationship with my son, exposed our family's dysfunction to public scrutiny, and required me to relive painful experiences in courtrooms and conference rooms across the country. But it gave me something more valuable than peace or comfort. It gave me back my voice. If you're listening to this story and recognizing your own situation, if someone in your family is pressuring you to sign documents you don't understand, questioning your competence, or gradually taking control of your finances and decisions, please know this: you are not alone, you are not powerless, and you do not have to accept abuse just because it comes from someone you love. Document everything. Keep detailed records of conversations, financial transactions, and attempts to manipulate or intimidate you. Trust your instincts, even when people are telling you those instincts are wrong. Seek help from professionals who understand elder abuse: attorneys, social workers, law enforcement officers who are trained to recognize these patterns. And remember, being related to someone doesn't give them ownership of your life. You have the right to make your own decisions, control your own resources, and live in safety and dignity regardless of your age. Silence can be a weapon when it's used to document abuse and build a case for justice. But It should never be a prison that keeps you trapped in a situation that diminishes your worth or threatens your well being. Your voice matters. Your independence matters. Your dignity matters. Use them. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt dismissed or taken advantage of because of your age, or if you believe that every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their relationship to you, then you understand why these stories need to be told. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self protection? Have you watched someone you love cross lines they never should have crossed? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. Subscribe to Grandma's Secrets for more accounts of dignity reclaimed, voices found, and justice served. Because when we speak our truth, we give others permission to speak theirs. And sometimes, that's the most powerful gift we can give. And remember, you are never too old to start over, never too trusting to be cautious, and never too loving to demand respect. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning.